the less women's perspective, women's issues are being taken, and the more violence women will be subjected to. The other implication that women's rights are pushing on is also to have that better cooperation and inclusion, because without women, many programs are not being inclusive of very specific groups or minorities, whether it is ethnic, tribes, minority, religious minority, sexual minority. It is extremely important to have a better cooperation with communities in order to have inclusive programming in the peace and security agenda. The other point that I've seen, women's rights, pushing, also working with our development corporations or partners of Africa, is to have a multi-sectoral approach or response to sexual violence. I've seen sexual violence, we cannot say all the programs that will involve women in the conflict affected area should be focusing on sexual violence. No, but we know that women need to have control of their body fully, to feel safe in order for their other contribution in development or in peace building itself to be effective. So a multi-sectoral response to sexual violence is extremely important. And we have seen for the past few years that most programs that are working on a peace and security agenda are considering the holistic approach and the victim or survival-centered approach to sexual violence. The other most important, one of the important things that we've been not focusing on as a feminist group sometimes is also to invest some effort and some energy as well as some resource in working with men and boys for a positive masculinity. It is extremely important because not only women are being victims, but sometimes we also have few boys and men who are victims who will later on go and create some other armed groups instead of contributing in peace building. So like I was saying, women's rights activists have been advocating in attention being given, the space being given, the voices being heard on the women's implication in the peace processes, in the conflict resolution in Africa. But now it is also important that the women's participation post-conflict should be considered, because women will be at the front in order for the conflict to end. But when it's time to put together government or programming or initiative, we will then see a pushback again. We have less women in different post-conflict countries. We have less women occupying decision-making position in the post-conflict countries. And we see women being presented most of the time as victims who need help, not as actors, not as actors who are transforming conflict into development, not as actors who are able to contribute meaningfully in rebuilding their different communities. So I will end here with questions. So we will share more, and I know we all have some kind of information, but just to link this with the CSW, we've also noticed that the conflict in Africa is being like shadowed with conflicts that are ongoing now in other continents, in Europe or in Middle East. We are seeing that attention and resources are being less allocated to the conflict in Africa, whether it's Sudan or the DRC or Mali or Niger or Mozambique or other countries, but it is more about Ukraine or Gaza, but we say life are imported all over the world, whether it is in Africa, in Gaza, in Ukraine. Resources should be allocated, attention should be given at the same level, and it's up to us to make sure that our conflict is also not forgotten. It still remains on the agenda, on the table. And this is also one implication where women's rights in Africa or feminists in Africa are making sure that our development partners continue to have attention, continue to allocate resources in the conflicts that are ongoing in Africa. So Patricia, I will end here for now and take questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Annie, for your wonderful for the presentation. You've raised issues around challenges facing many African countries and the fact that a lot of African countries are not implementing UN SCR 1325. You've also talked about the need for us as feminist organizations in Africa to form a strong women's movement on peace and security. Because when we look at the African continent, there are a lot of conflicts ongoing. And I agree with you that it's important that we form a strong movement on peace and security. Yes, you've talked about inadequate resources and the fact that UN Women is funding advocacy, supporting women organizations to be part of advocacies around peace and security is not being enough, because we also need to see how women are part of negotiation processes, and also especially during post-conflict reforms, the need for women to be part of decision-making processes. And we are talking about localization and the need for localization of funds to concrete actions. With the rhetoric is becoming too much. We need to walk the talk. You've made that clearly. And also importantly, the fact that the whole world is focusing on Ukraine-Russian war and the Gaza war, whilst there are a lot of conflicts on African continent. So it is important that adequate resources and attention at the same level is given to all conflicts, because the life of all people are important. Whether you are on the African continent or you are on the Asia continent, Europe, America, or wherever you find, Latin America, wherever you find yourself, all the lives of people are important, and we must pay equal attention to that. Thank you so much. I will open the floor for, I don't know if we have hands, people that will want to make contribution. And Cynthia, do we have anyone that wants to make contribution? I'll plead with interpreters, especially the French one translating into English. There are, in the charts, there are some issues that we are unable to read. So if you could quickly do justice to read for us by explaining what the issues that have been, the messages in the chat box that are in French, if you would kindly interpret it for us. Thank you.
Hello.
Yes, we can hear you. Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much. What we will do is that after this webinar, we will ensure that all the presentations are translated into French, and then we share it with all participants. If Annie's presentation is in French, though she did it in English, we would also translate that in English and then share with all participants. Thank you so much. If we don't have any hands, we'll quickly move on to our next section, which looks at CSW 68 outcomes and development cooperation, linkages for sustainable development. And we have with us Memory. Memory, I always don't mention your last name properly. Kachamwa, Executive Director of Femnet. Femnet is based in Kenya. I'll quickly read Memory's profile, and then she takes over from me. So Memory is the Executive Director at the African Women's Development and Communication Network, known as Femnet. She is a Pan-African feminist, gender and women's rights leader with deep experience in organizing and advocating for feminist policies at the regional, national, and international levels, and over 20 years experience developing, managing, and implementing programs promoting women and girls' rights regionally and globally. A seasoned cross-cultural thought leader and strategist, bridging national, regional, global women's rights network with policy leaders. I've already mentioned that she's executive director. She has stood against authoritarian and neoliberal colonial systems and even called for reform of the UN CSW by co-creating the African District to enable more women and girls in all their diversity access to the UN. So you will agree with me that she's the best person to handle our section on CSW 68 outcomes and development for cooperation, linkages for sustainable development. Memory, you have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Patricia. Trisha, I'm not so sure whether you can hear me. I'm going to say Nairobi. So good morning, good afternoon. Trisha, if you can't hear me, you will just let me know.
We can hear you.
Can hear you, Memory.
Just try as much as possible to, but just you can hear me. Okay, great. You can hear me?
Yes, Memory, please go on.
Okay, all right. Okay, so I'm going to speak a little bit about the outcomes of the CSW 68 outcomes and development cooperation and the linkages for sustainable development. But before I spoke that, I just wanted to just recognize the work that Patricia and CPD and the members have been doing, and how the work for CSW links a lot with the overall mandate for cooperative development. This year's women's the themes for CSW, the main priority theme was on accelerating the achievement of gender equality and the empowerment of all women and girls by addressing poverty and strengthening institutions and financing with a gender perspective. So the main priorities were around that. From the Africa civil society, we're pushing for economic justice, specifically issues concerning tax, debt, and trade, unpaid care work, and intersections with climate justice, including sexual reproductive health and rights, as well as integrating the issue around women in peace and conflict areas. So I will start with the key things that we can say were really missing from the agreed conclusions. So I'll start with what were some of the key issues that we noted, particularly when it comes to development cooperation. So the first one was really issues around international trade. We noted that there wasn't, the agreed conclusions were silent on issues to do with trade negotiations, how women are impacted. Particularly, we know in Africa, a lot of women are involved in cross-border trade. At the micro level, but also at trade agreements within the different countries. It could be with the EU, it could be with China, it could be with the US, and how those have impacts in terms of women's attaining their full economic rights. So it was a bit silent on that. Another issue is that
Hello, Memory. Hello.
it's for women link, with East Africa, how in terms of their economic rights. So having specific provisions in the agreed conclusions, we saw that this was actually missing, and how when we see the changes in climate, knowing how it disproportionately affects women and girls and push